All right, so welcome to Intro to Identifying Raptors. So to begin with here, so the agenda for today, we have a couple different sections. The first is tools for identification, and that's just going to go over a couple of different methods to use to potentially identify to either group or specific species of some of the raptors that you might encounter in Vermont. Next section is going to go over specific species accounts for each type of raptor, and we'll go a little more in depth into what characteristics you want to look for. The next section is going to be kind of putting it all together. So we're going to talk a little bit about why it is important to be able to identify raptors, and also we are going to have a fun little photo quiz to kind of put together all of the things that we've learned from the presentation. And then last but not least, we have some recommended resources, and those include some books, websites, and just some really helpful tools for really helping you along in your raptor identification journey. All right, so let's get started. So first off, tools for identification, we're going to go over the shape, size, flight style, habitat, season, and field marks. So for shape, really what we're looking for is the overall silhouette. This can include the shape of the body. So is it very long and narrow, kind of tubular? Is it very barrel-chested, very kind of big, bulky? Is it a very kind of narrow waist? Another thing we might look for is the shape of the wings. Are they very long and broad? Are they more short and rounded? Or are they very pointed? All of these can really help give us a better picture of what we're looking at. Shape and length of tail is a really important tool, especially when we're getting into birds that look very similar, but oftentimes the only really clear difference, especially at distance, is the length of the tail. And then also just overall proportions. So how does the head compare to the tail? Is it shorter? Is it longer? And also wings compared to tail. Does it have very, very long wings and a very short tail, or very short wings and a very long tail? And then to the side of the screen here, you can see samples of a couple of those different species silhouettes. We have our falcons. Again, you can see those very kind of long pointed wings and a long, mostly rounded tail. We have our accipiters. They have those nice little rounded wings with a very long tail in proportion to their body. Our buteos, the soaring hawks, have those long, broad wings that help keep them aloft. The harriers, they're just these very long, lanky birds, again, with long wings and a very long tail. Ospreys, of course, have this very unique kind of crook in their wing. They almost look like a flying M. And then the eagles, just very long, straight, broad wings with a fairly long tail. And last but not least, the vultures, similar in some aspects to the eagles, again with fairly long wings and a long tail, but they have a pretty tiny head. So next up is one of the most difficult aspects, and that is size. So size can be very hard to judge, especially from a distance, and especially when a bird is in flight. So a scale that we tend to use when trying to judge the size of really any bird, including raptors, is sparrow, robin, crow, and goose. Those are fairly common species, and we tend to have a pretty good idea of the scale of those birds. On the bottom, you can see a crow up in that corner, and to the bottom left, we have a bald eagle, and you can see that the bald eagle is significantly larger than the crow. So again, it's really nice when you have one of those known birds in the same frame as another, but it's good to just kind of keep in mind this image of the sparrow, robin, crow, goose scale, because it can really come in handy, especially when you get into birds that look extremely similar, like the sharp-shinned or the Cooper's hawk, and size is sometimes the only distinct characteristics that you can see when they're going by real quick. So next up is flight style. Flight style is a really great thing to know, because even if you can't see a lot of the other aspects like the size or the exact color of a bird, you can usually tell how it's flying. So for different shapes of wings, we have a dihedral. That is a very strong V shape, often seen with vultures. One thought that I always keep in my head is, or one kind of mantra is V for vulture. So if you see a bird that's holding its wings in that very strong V shape, odds are it is most likely turkey vulture. So another type of flight style is the modified dihedral. So this is kind of a less dramatic V, and instead of just going straight up, the wings kind of flatten towards the tips. This is a posture that you'll often see with black vultures. Then the last is wings that are just held very flat. We see this with our large birds like our bald eagles, and they just have these very flat, very steady wings. And at a distance, it's very nice. You can just see like a very dark, very straight line, and a lot of times you can safely say, okay, I'm pretty confident that's an eagle. So when it comes to behavior, we have quite a few different behaviors that are unique to certain species, and some that span a lot of different raptor species. So first we have hovering. So that's when a bird remains stationary but uses very quick wing beats to kind of keep itself in place. This is often used to hunt prey over very open areas, and it's commonly seen with species such as the American kestrel, like the female kestrel you can see in the bottom there. It's also seen with ospreys, and you'll see them over water hovering, looking for fish. It just really helps to give them a great vantage point for kind of locking in on prey. Another behavior is kiting. So that's similar to hovering, but instead of kind of staying in place under their own power, when kiting, a raptor will use the wind to kind of hold itself in one place. So you'll often see red-tailed hawks doing this, especially from areas like Hawk Watch that's at high elevation, and you have winds that are kind of hitting the side of a mountain and going straight up. You'll often see red tails kiting on these updrafts and just staying in place, their wings held tight, and even though they're not exerting any effort, they're still staying in place. And lastly, another behavior that is commonly seen in raptors is stooping. So when a raptor tucks in to dive and do a very, very tight, very almost arrow-like shape, that allows for increased speed and an increased ability to pursue prey. Kind of the bird that's most famous for this behavior is the peregrine falcon. And stooping is what allows them to gain speeds of over 200 miles an hour. So if you see a bird traveling at incredible speed in that stooping posture, then it could be one of our falcons. So next, and arguably one of the most important tools for identification, is habitat. A lot of times you can really narrow down what raptors you're looking at by knowing which ones are native to the specific habitat that you're in. So for example, for very open areas such as grasslands or field edges, we would typically think our harriers or kestrels. They're the ones who are you often see perched out on fence posts or on a telephone wire looking for any rodents or insects or small songbirds that are kind of hiding in the grass. Another bird that you'll especially see on those field edges, or kind of the transitional zones between either a forest and a field or road and a field, are red-tailed hawks. Again, that's a really great place to find small rodents and other prey that they prefer. And then for forests, so forest can be a tough environment. A lot of times it's a very kind of tight space. You have to be very maneuverable. So a lot of the species we'd expect to see in our forests are accipiters. So that is our sharpshins, our coopers, our goshawks. And they're often targeting either songbirds, or sometimes in the case of the goshawk, they're even going after larger prey such as grouse or even hare and rabbits. So bodies of water, there are a couple of raptors that you'd be likely to see, although that depends on what type of body of water. So if we're thinking a mountain bog or lake, then you might see a merlin. They tend to nest in these kind of like higher forest marsh bog habitats. If you're more lower elevation on a river stream edge, then you could potentially see our bald eagles. Also lakes, marshes, coastlines, that's where you'd find our bald eagles, our ospreys, our fish-eating hawks, any of the ones who are very well adapted to going after more marine prey items, and also waterfowl in the case of the bald eagle. And then we do have some birds that have adapted fairly well to hunting in more urban settings. And down in that bottom corner, you can see a Cooper's hawk. They are kind of prolific when it comes to going after birds at bird feeders. So they're ones that you can often see in your backyard. Another bird that has actually taken to nesting on human structures is actually two, are the osprey and the peregrine falcon. Peregrine falcons are one that you can see in the middle of a large city, often on top of skyscrapers, because their other preferred habitat are cliff sides and other high elevations, so they really feel at home in places like large cities with very tall skyscrapers. Then osprey, they have been known to nest on boat pilings, on light fixtures, on lots of human structures. That isn't always the most convenient. So next, we have season. So many of our raptors are actually migratory and will move to the southern US, Central America, and some is even as far as South America during the winter months. In the top picture, you can see our broadwing hawk, and the broadwing hawk in the breeding season will spend their time in much of kind of northern US and Canada, but during the migration season, we'll see them kind of move down through the US, through Central America, and into countries like we'll see them in Venezuela, Colombia, a lot of the countries that encompass the Amazon rainforest. That's often where they will overwinter. Then, of course, we have some birds that are actually coming from the high tundra and are coming here for their winter season. And those include our rough-legged hawks and also some other species. Like we'll see some northern variants of the red-tailed hawk will actually migrate from further north to Vermont and New England during the winter. So it kind of goes both ways. We lose some raptors and we gain some raptors during different seasons. So it's definitely worth taking note on the migration patterns of different raptors. So next up is field marks. So field marks can be difficult. One aspect is the fact that adult birds and juvenile birds can often look very different. For example, in red-tailed hawks, an immature red-tailed hawk actually doesn't have that vibrant red tail. For other birds, like the American kestrel, an immature kestrel will look somewhat similar to a female adult American kestrel, but will still have like more streaking, just looks a little less defined. And then, oh goodness. Oh, sorry about that. There we go, back to field marks. Everyone still see that okay?
Yep, you're good, Hannah. We did lose your video stream, but
oh,
I think
okay.
well, for the slide portion, that's
gotcha.
probably okay.
All right. Okay. So back to field marks. So yeah, like I mentioned, American kestrels, males versus females, they can have some differences. Males are often more brightly colored. And we also have a couple of our larger raptor species like the northern harrier, where the male and the female do have different plumages. The male is typically this really beautiful light gray with very dark wingtips, while the female is more of an overall kind of chocolatey brown. I have some pictures of them later in the slideshow where we can really kind of dive into those differences. And then one factor that can make ID really difficult is lighting and time of day. So in the two top pictures, we have the same species of bird, but the first picture you can see it's a very kind of dark, cloudy sky, not great lighting, and the bird just looks very dark overall. We can't really see a lot of variation in that color. And then that picture, apologies, that picture right next to it, you can see a very clear difference in the top and bottom of the wing. And so these two birds are both turkey vultures, but in one you can really see that nice kind of two-toned, dark and silvery wing pattern, and the other one, it just looks all dark. And of course, the really fun aspect and kind of the last point for field marks that I'm going to touch on is abnormal plumage. So we do get some birds, like the red tail in the bottom picture, that have a condition called leucism, where they actually lose pigment in a lot of their feathers, and those feathers will grow back white. And you'll often have some birds that are even completely white. There are also birds that can be albinos. They would be completely white with that kind of reddish eye and pink, any of the skin showing to be pink. Another thing that can impact the overall perception of our shape of a raptor is missing feathers. So raptors molt during certain times of year, and that can mean losing a lot of those wing feathers at different times, which can really change the overall shape. And then also we can get different morphs of birds. So again, for the red tail, we have light morphs, dark morphs. So even though they're all technically the same species, they can appear to have very different plumages. Then here we just have the topography of a bird. So we have kind of that underside view. This is, again, a red-tailed hawk. And we have the topography of the wings, the secondaries, the primaries. That's really a lot of the shape of the wing comes from those feathers. The rectrices, the tail feathers, that's another really good thing to look for. And then especially on the red tail, the breast feathers and the belly, because they have this really distinct, beautiful belly band. Here we have the top side. You can see the nape in the back. A lot of times you're not really able to see these super well from the ground. So this would be more kind of viewing a bird either perched or from above, like at certain hawk watches. And then we have the rump and the upper wing coverts. So the last group of field marks and kind of topography of a bird are the ones that we usually find on the head and the face. And those are, of course, the different parts of the bill. We have that gape, which is the little kind of fleshy bit around their mouth, the cere, and then the nair or nostril, the eye ring, and then the supercilium or eyebrow. And then for falcons especially, we can look for the malar stripe or mustache. This can be a really important tool when distinguishing between different species of falcon. And again, we'll go into more detail on that further in the presentation. All right, before I get into types of raptors and different species of counts, are there any questions?
Nothing in the chat so far.
Okay, all right, I will just jump right into it. Okay, so first off, we have our beautios, and that is our soaring hawks. So these are typically hawks that have very long, broad wings and relatively short tails in comparison to those wings. So the first and probably the most iconic of these species is the red-tailed hawk. So they're actually the largest beautyo in the eastern US, and their habitat, they're pretty diverse when it comes to their habitat, though we typically tend to see them on forest edges, fields, roadsides. You can also find them in some forested habitat. And then for prey, they typically target rodents, but they are pretty opportunistic. and will also scavenge if the opportunity presents itself. So here we have an adult, an immature red tail, and also a view of one in flight. So for the adult, again, what we're looking for is that really nice defined belly band, and then a white breast that we also call a bib. And oftentimes when you're driving down the road, that's what you see is that white bib, because that can really stick out, especially against a brown or green background of the trees. Red tails can also be distinguished by their dark patagials. So again, that patch kind of right on top of their shoulder. And they also tend to have a very dark leading edge of their wing. And of course, as their name suggests, they tend to have that beautiful rusty red tail. Although we do keep in mind that plumage can vary by subspecies. Though it's not quite as common here on the East Coast, if you were to go out west, you might see some red tails like the Kreider's morph or the Harlan's morph that are either almost entirely pale and lack a really defined belly band and even sometimes a red tail, or they are completely dark. And again, the color of the tail is almost indistinguishable from the color of the body. So for immature red tails, again, we still have that beautiful thick belly band and a white bib, very similar to the adult, but they have a brown tail and they have multiple thin tail bands. In flight, red tails have a really beautiful classic buteo shape. A really iconic characteristic for them is the bulging secondaries of the wings. There's not many other buteos that show that much of a bulge. So if you see buteo soaring with that distinct shape, then your odds are pretty good that it's a red tail. When in active flight, their wing beats tend to be very shallow and labored. And then they're, again, a species that we will often see hovering or kiting. So the next species is the red-shouldered hawk. So these are another large buteo, only slightly smaller than our red tails. For habitat, they tend to prefer deciduous forests, also wetlands and river edges. They're actually very well adapted to hunting more riparian species. And as for prey, they will go after amphibians, reptiles, and also small rodents. So again, we have an adult, an immature, and a red-shouldered in flight. So for the adult, they have this very bright kind of rusty red barring on their underside, and that same coloration carries onto their shoulders. On their back, they have this bright black and white checkerboard pattern on that also carries onto the back of their wings. And then their tail is just this solid black with very thin white tail bands. So for the immature red-shouldered, it is similar in appearance to a red-tailed hawk, although instead of having that streaky belly band, their streaking is concentrated in that bib area, so right around their neck and down onto their breast. And they have a brown tail with very thin white tail bands that are actually thicker. If you look really close, they're thicker than that of an immature red tails. So in flight, red shoulders actually have a really nice tell. So their primaries have this clear kind of crescent-shaped window that they show, especially when the sun is shining directly back through them. And you can see that from a pretty far distance. So if you see crescents on a wing, then again, your bets are pretty good that you're looking at a red shoulder. They also have a very long tail for a buteo. There have been times where I've had a red shoulder go by very, very quickly, and all I saw was that long tail, and it made me think that, oh, that kind of looks like an accipiter. But yeah, they just have an abnormally long tail for a buteo. When in flight, they tend to keep their wings very flat or slightly raised, and they also hold them slightly forward. It's almost like, I've heard folks say it's like they're trying to kind of hug the sky. And then also, kind of similar to an accipiter, they will alternate flapping and soaring instead of just doing straight flapping when in flight. So next up is our broadwing hawk. So they are one of the smallest buteos in the eastern US. And for habitat, they tend to prefer deciduous and coniferous forests, although you can also find them on roadsides. For prey, they tend to target smaller prey items, so reptiles, amphibians, and also small mammals. So for adult broadwings, they have this very dark reddish-brown barring on the underside, typically heaviest around the neck and kind of down into that breast area. So their tail's pretty distinct. They have a set of very thick black and white tail bands. Oftentimes you only see that one very thick bottom white band when in flight. And they also have a very dark trailing edge to their wings. So that kind of bottom edge of their wing, closer to their tail. As far as immature broadwings go, they have a very pale chest, and the streaking tends to be concentrated more on their flanks. So it doesn't tend to go typically straight across their chest, but more framing it. They also have multiple faint, thin tail bands, kind of similar to a red-shouldered hawk. And there are instances where it can be difficult to tell a red-shouldered and a broadwing apart, especially when they're immatures. And that is definitely one thing to keep in mind when identifying raptors is it's okay sometimes to go with unknown raptor. There is no shame in that. So in flight, broadwings have a very distinct pointed, a lot of folks call it a candle flame wing shape. And then wing beats, very quick and choppy. Like you can tell that this, based on the way it carries itself, is a smaller bird than our red shoulders or our larger videos like red tails. And they also hold their wings very flat. So as you might have caught a glimpse of before, let's see if this works here. Broadwings also have a very interesting behavior when they migrate. And that is, they actually migrate in very large groups called kettles. So here, if you can see that video, those are all broadwing hawks. This was taken at the Big of a Knob Hawk Watch back in September of last year. And again, you can see those beautiful candle flame shaped wings. Sometimes you get a flash of that tail band. I know this isn't the best video quality here. All right. Okay, so next up, we have our visitor from the north, and that is our rough-legged hawk. So they're another larger BDO, and their typical habitat is the tundra, open grasslands, or farmland. So they're really well adapted to hunting in these open areas. And their prey is primarily small mammals. So for adults, we actually have two main morphs, the light morph and the dark morph. The light morph rough-legged hawk has these very dark carpal or wrist patches, again with a very dark trailing edge on their wing. They also have a very dark brown belly patch and a very white tail base. Oftentimes that's kind of the first thing you pick up on when you see a light morph is that just flash of white from their tail. For the dark morph, they tend to be dark overall, but they still have those light flight feathers and a very pale tail base. Adults also have dark eyes, and it can be very difficult to distinguish between a male and a female rough-legged. Oftentimes, the only way we can tell is if we actually have that bird in hand and can take measurements to tell the difference. Even then, there can be a lot of overlap. So for immatures, they are similar to adults, but instead of having those very dark brown eyes, they actually have pale yellow eyes. And they have these, you can kind of see it in this little picture, almost this white window in the primaries. The trailing edge of their wings also appears to be more almost blurred than that of the adult. They also tend to have a fainter terminal tail band, or that band at the end of their tail, than the adults. And then in flight, rough-leggeds have a very distinct shape. They're these very long, lanky birds, so very narrow, long wings. And they often hold their wings raised in a dihedral, so similar to that of our vultures, although not as dramatic of a V. They also have these very deep, kind of floppy wing beats. And like our red tails, they are a species that you'll often see hovering. And then here you can see again those variation in rough-legged hawks. We have our light morph. Again, you have those that white tail base, kind of not as strong of a dark belly patch here, but you can still see traces of it. Those light flight feathers. And then that dark morph, again, it's kind of just one color throughout the body, and then the wings still have that kind of pale silvery look, and then that very pale tail base. So that was it for our buteos. Now we're on to our formerly all accipiters, now accipiters and asters. So those are the forest hawks. These are hawks that tend to have very short, rounded wings with long tails that are perfect for maneuvering through the branches and brush of a forest environment. So first is the sharp-shinned hawk. So they are a very small accipiter. They're only about the size of a blue jay on average. Their habitat is deciduous and coniferous forests, although they have also taken quite well to urban and suburban areas. They're a visitor that you will often see stalking your bird feeders, and they tend to prey on small songbirds. So for the sharp-shinned hawk, the adult has this very distinct, almost hooded appearance with a dark head and a dark nape. They also have this rusty rufous barring on their chest. They have even rectrices, so all their tail feathers are the same length, giving it a very squared off appearance. And then their eyes as an adult tend to be orange or a very bright red. The immatures, on the other hand, they have a very messy brown kind of vertical streaking all down their chest and kind of down into their flanks. They have this lighter brown topside, and instead of that orangey red eye, they have a bright yellow eye. For in flight, I always like to think of sharp-shins as flying mallets. So when their wings are kind of tucked up, their head often disappears into the dip of that wing. Their wing beats are very fast and snappy, and it's very buoyant. If you see a sharp-shin flying in the wind, they're just being tossed around. It's very similar. I always think of it as like a butterfly. If butterfly were a bird, it would be a sharp-shinned hawk. And like most accipiters, they have this alternating kind of flapping and gliding flight pattern. So next, we have a very similar looking bird, and that is our Cooper's hawk. So Cooper's hawk is a mid-sized member of the aster family, formerly accipiter, and their habitat is similar to sharp-shinned, deciduous and coniferous forests, and they are another species that's taken very well to urban and suburban areas and people's bird feeders. They also mainly prey on songbirds, although they will target other small raptors, including kestrels and merlins. So for the adult Cooper's hawk, they actually have this very large, blocky head, and instead of a dark hood, they have a very dark, almost black cap with this light tan nape. They also have, kind of similar to a Sharpie, that rufous barring on their chest, and instead of having a tail with all even rectrices, their outermost rectrices are shorter, so it gives the tail this very rounded appearance when perched or in flight. Immature Cooper's hawks, they have a very clean streaking as opposed to the kind of messier streaking we saw in the Sharpie. It almost looks like these perfect little teardrops kind of running down its chest and down to its flanks. They also have that brown topside and yellow eye as well. So in flight, I like to think of Coopers as a flying cross. So instead of their head disappearing into the dip of their wings, their head actually extends a little bit further than that dip. They actually soar with a slight dihedral, and instead of having those kind of light, snappy wing beats, theirs are a lot stiffer and slower. And of course, as the sharp-shinned did, they also alternate between flapping and gliding. So here's a nice little helpful infographic where we have the species side by side, and you can really see those differences. So for the Sharpie, we have a very small kind of low set bill. And here on the Coopers, large high set bill, you can see the nair, so their nostril is actually even with their pupil, whereas in the Sharpie, it's a little bit lower. Again, that the hooded versus the capped appearance. The Cooper has this very thick kind of tubular body. It looks almost the same width most of the way down, whereas the Sharpie has more of this almost pear shape with a very broad chest, but a very tiny little waist. When it comes to their legs, Sharpshins also, although this can be somewhat hard to see, especially in the field, Sharpies have these thinner, kind of more daintier legs, whereas Coopers have very thick legs in comparison. And here you can really see those even tail feathers versus the uneven tail feathers of the Cooper's hawk. And again, this is a comparison that even the most seasoned of birders often get wrong. Sharpies versus Coopers, especially when seen just very quickly or at a distance, can be very difficult to differentiate. All right, last but not least is the American goshawk. So this is the largest and the rarest of our asters / accipiters in the US. Their habitat, they typically prefer open woodlands, coniferous or deciduous, especially old growth forest. And their prey is primarily larger birds. They'll often target grouse and mammals, including snowshoe hare. So they're big, powerful birds that will go after larger, more powerful prey. So for the adult, they have a very distinct look, this pale underside with faint dark barring. And then that top side is this dark kind of slate gray with a almost bluish look to that cap on their head. And then a blue or a bold white eyebrow. Their eyes typically are a red to reddish orange as adults. So for the immature birds, they still have that bold white eyebrow, but they have very heavy streaking down the front. And unlike the Coopers and the Sharpie, this streaking is very dense and it extends all over the body. So down the chest, into the undertail coverts, onto some of the coverts of the wings. They also have this kind of brown cinnamony modeling on the back of their head that extends down their back as well. And they typically have a more yellow eye. In flight, the American goshawk has this very large, very tubular body with a small head and a long tail. In flight, it's easy to mistake them for a beauty owl because, again, those just long, broad wings, and this just feels like a very bulky bird. They also tend to soar on flat wings in very wide circles. And their wing beats are very deep and fluid, again, very similar to a beauty owl. All right, so next up we have our falcons. So the falcons are very fast-moving raptors that tend to have long, very pointed wings. So first is our smallest falcon, and that is the American kestrel. So for habitat, they tend to prefer our grasslands and open farmland. You'll often see kestrel boxes like those that VINS manages out in fields. And you'll often see kestrels either at the boxes or perched on power lines. So if ever you're going by a grassland and you see a kestrel box, keep an eye out for a kestrel. For prey, they tend to prefer insects, reptiles, and smaller mammals, although they will also target songbirds. So for the adult, we do have some differences between the male and the female. For the male, we have this orangey back with blue upper wings and black primaries. They also have a solid orange tail with a very bold black tip. And you can see in this picture this beautiful kind of dark spotting that goes down their breast. The females, they are orange pretty much all over, with a blue cap. Their tail is orange with multiple dark bands instead of just that one kind of dark terminal band like the male. And instead of the spots, females have a streaked breast. Both have very dark eyes, and they have 2 malar stripes or mustache markings. So for the immature, they, instead of having kind of the cleaner streaking of a female or the spotting of a male, they have this very kind of messy streaking all down their chest that is this beautiful light brown. But overall, they tend to be more similar in appearance to adult females. So in flight, kestrels show very long, slender wings that tend to be less severely pointed than other falcons. They have very buoyant flight, again, kind of similar to the Sharpie. It's very butterfly-like. They'll often be buffeted by the wind, and you rarely see them kind of flying in a direct line. It's usually kind of all over the place. For wing beats, they're typically very quick, very snappy. And they're another species that you'll often see hovering over open fields. Next, we have the merlin. So they're slightly larger than kestrels. And for habitat, we tend to see them in boreal forests, bogs, and lake edges, and also in urban areas. They will prey on small birds and also small mammals. So for the merlin, the adult male has a kind of bluish back with a lighter underside and very dense dark brown streaking. Females lack that blue coloration. Their back is more of a slate gray, and they have this kind of brown wash to their underside instead of the clean white, and they also have dark streaking. Both have very dark eyes and a single faint mustache instead of that double mustache that we saw with the kestrel. For immatures, they are very similar in appearance to adult females, and really the only significant difference is they lack that gray wash to their back that the females have. So that's another one that can be difficult to tell at a distance. So in flight, the wings are much broader than that of kestrel and also much more severely pointed. They tend to have a smaller head and a shorter, less pointed tail than that of a peregrine. And they have very stiff, rapid wing beats. And instead of, like we saw with the kestrel, being kind of buffeted around by the wind, a merlin has very steady, direct, sustained flight. Like if you have a smaller falcon that just goes whipping by you in a straight line, then your bets are pretty good that was a merlin. So last but not least is our peregrine falcon. So they are a very large falcon, and for habitats, they tend to prefer sheer cliff sides, marshes, open areas, and urban settings like skyscrapers, because those, as I mentioned earlier, can mimic their natural habitats, like those kind of sheer cliff sides. For prey, they will target waterfowl, shorebirds, and pigeons. They are very powerful predators, so they can take down prey significantly larger than themselves. So for the adults, they have very stark white underside with dark barring on the belly and down through the chest, or down through the flanks. And they also have a distinct kind of checkered pattern on the underwings. For the back, it's this beautiful slate blue, very dark, with a almost black head. And they have those very thick malar stripes that looks more like a mask than just kind of a single mustache. They also have a yellow cere, so that area of their bill that includes their nair. Also yellow legs and a bright yellow eye ring. For immature peregrines, they have a more buffy underside with dark streaking. Also a dark brown back that lacks that kind of slatey blue color. And instead of yellow, they have a bluish cere, blue legs, and a blue eye ring. So in flight, peregrines have a very distinct shape. Their wings are very pointed and very long. They tend to soar on flat wings or in a very shallow dihedral. And their wing beats are very fast and very, very whip-like, especially if they're starting to pick up speed to go into a dive. And it's a very steady flight. Even in heavy winds, they can really hold themselves in a solid direction, as opposed to our kestrel. And of course, that behavior that the peregrine falcon is probably most famous for is stooping. And you'll often see them engaging in that when going after prey. And again, they can reach speeds over 200 miles per hour. So next up, we have our eagles. So eagles are our largest raptors, and they have very long, broad wings and large heads. So first is probably one of our most iconic raptor species, and that is the bald eagle. They are one of the largest raptors in the US, and for habitat, we typically see them near water. So that can be lakes, rivers, coastlines, streams, really anywhere there's a large body of water, you have the possibility of seeing a bald eagle. As far as prey, they will largely target fish. They'll also go after waterfowl, but they're also scavengers. Eagles are not afraid to go after roadkill, and also they are kleptoparasitic, meaning that they will actually steal food from other birds. It's pretty common for them to steal fish from osprey or steal other prey from other raptors. So they really don't differentiate. So for adults, they have that beautiful, crisp white head, bright yellow bill, bright white tail, and those really thick yellow legs with a dark kind of chocolatey brown body and wings. They also have these very striking pale yellow eyes. So for immature bald eagles, it gets pretty interesting. So their plumage can actually vary between the first and the 5th year, because bald eagles don't actually get that full white head and tail until they're about 5 years old. So for a first-year bird, like the one pictured in the middle here, they tend to have a very dark bill and eyes. And if you were to look at the auxiliaries, so kind of like their wing pits, you would see some white there. As they get older, for example, a 2nd year, they would actually gain more white on their chest and kind of lose some of that dark coloration in their bill. And they would, by the time they're about 4 or 5 years old, have, again, that full white head and tail, although oftentimes still with some hints of brown. So in flight, what you really notice is that very large head and bill. Those can stick out even from a distance, and it's always so nice when the light catches the white head of an adult and you can just be like, okay, I know that's a bald eagle. They have a very slow, steady flight, even in high winds, and they're a bird that soars on very flat wings. So, like I mentioned earlier, if you see a bird out there and it's just a kind of flat black line, then don't rule out eagle as your option. And they have very powerful, stiff wing beats in direct flight. So next up, we have a bird that is a visitor to Vermont, though as far as we know, not a current resident. That is the golden eagle. So they are comparable in size to the bald eagle. There's really not much difference between the two size-wise. For habitats, they tend to prefer open grasslands or open mountainous terrain. And their prey is typically mammals or even other large birds. They're also an opportunistic species that will scavenge, similar to bald eagles. So for the adult golden eagle, we have that beautiful dark brown body with the iconic kind of golden nape, so that area around their neck. If you were to look at their flight feathers, they would have a grayish banding kind of going all the way down, and they also have very dark eyes. So for the immature golden eagle, it's kind of a similar scenario to our bald eagles, where the immature birds don't lose their immature plumage until they're about 4 or 5 years old. So for immature golden eagles, we typically see a white tail base and then these very distinct white wing patches. And again, 1st and 4th year birds have very variable amounts of white in their wing and tail until about 4 or 5 years old, where they completely lose that white. So in flight, golden eagles, again, have very long, broad wings, but unlike the bald eagle, their tail is significantly longer than their head. So oftentimes, if you see them at a distance, they almost look, they give a profile more similar to that of a vulture. They will often soar in wide circles compared to other raptors, and you will often see them flying with vultures, which can add to the confusion. And to add even more to the confusion, they can also soar with a dihedral, though not as strong as our turkey vultures. And again, similar to the bald eagle, steady flight with slow, even wing beats. So of course, next up, it's only fitting that we have our vultures. So these are large raptors with long, broad wings, yet small, featherless heads. So first is our turkey vulture. So they are one of the largest raptors in the US, so they are smaller than our eagle species. Their habitat is typically open areas, and they will often be seen perching on snags, so large dead trees, or man-made structures. They pretty much only eat dead things. So carrion, their sense of smell is pretty incredible, so they can smell carrion from up to a mile away, possibly even further. We're still trying to figure that out. So for adult turkey vultures, they have a very uniform, kind of dark blackish brown body, though if you see them in the sunlight, they have these hints of blue and gold, really, really a gorgeous bird. They have on their wings these two-toned, this kind of two-tone pattern where the flight feathers are this very bright kind of silvery gray, whereas their upper wing coverts are kind of that same dark brownish black of the body. They have, of course, that featherless head with red skin and a pale bill. You can also see these little growths on some vultures called tubercles. And you can actually identify individual vultures based off of the pattern of those tubercles. So for immature turkey vultures, they are very similar to adults, but instead of having that red head, they actually have a very dark head and a very dark bill. And on this one, you can actually see a little bit of that baby fluff right at the base of his neck. So in flight, turkey vultures show very long, broad wings, again with a long tail, but a very small head. They have a very buoyant, distinct kind of rocking flight, where even though they're large birds, they look very unsteady, even in slight wind. They hold their wings in a very strong dihedral. So again, the V for vulture is a great thing to remember. And the wing beats end very abruptly. They almost look kind of unfinished. They just end very abruptly on the upstroke. So next we have our black vulture. So this is kind of this species is a newcomer to the Northeast. They are another large raptor similar in size to turkey vultures, and they also overlap in habitat. So again, open areas and often seen perching on snags or man-made structures. They will also primarily prey on carrion, and they will often follow turkey vultures to a site and will sometimes even chase them off of the food that they found. So lots of drama out there in the bird world. So for adult black vultures, they have, again, that uniform, very true black body, but they have silver primaries. So those very outermost wing feathers, they almost look like these kind of silvery white fingers. They also have these grayish featherless heads with a lighter bill and black eyes. Immature birds, they are very similar to adults, but they have, instead of that grayish skin, they have a very dark, almost black head and bill. So in flight, black vultures have a distinct shape, broad, squared off wings with a very short tail and very small head. Oftentimes, you see them in flight and they look tailless. They just look like pretty much a flying set of wings. They are actually steadier in flight than turkey vultures. You don't typically see that rocking from them. And they actually soar on flat wings, more similar to that of a bald eagle, although sometimes you will see the very tips of their wings kind of curl up slightly. And they have very shallow, kind of snappy wing beats. So next up is one of our very unique raptor species, and that is our harrier. So they are these lanky raptors with almost owl-like facial discs. So again, here you can see very short face, and you can just barely see kind of the edge of that disc. So the northern harrier is a mid-sized raptor, and their habitat is typically grasslands, farmland, and marshes. And their prey is primarily small mammals and songbirds. So for the adults, again, we do see a difference between the adult male and the adult female. So the male have this very stark white underside with black wingtips and this steely gray topside. They also have bright yellow eyes. The female, on the other hand, is a bit more drab. She has more of a buffy underside with this very dense brown streaking, kind of overall uniform brown topside, and very dark eyes. And the reason for this is northern harriers are actually ground nesters, so they will just build their nest in a field. And since females are the ones that are more often incubating on the nest, it's good that they have a bit more camouflage with that kind of drabber color scheme that can help them really hide themselves from predators a little more effectively than the males. Both have a very bright white patch right on their rump, and that pronounced kind of owl-like facial disc. So immature harriers do share some similarities with the adult female, but instead of having that dense streaking, they have more of just this kind of clean, smooth chest and flank. That's this very warm cinnamony color. And then the top side is a uniform brown, similar to the females. So last but not least is our osprey. So one of our more unique raptors. Osprey are large raptors with very long, very lanky wings and a very small head in comparison. So again, the osprey is a relatively large raptor. Their habitat is really anywhere near water, and that's lakes, rivers, coastlines, salt or freshwater. They're pretty well adapted to just about every marine environment. And their prey is fish. As you can see from those huge talons, they have adapted pretty well to just catching fish. So here we have an adult osprey. So their color scheme is this blackish brown topside with a white cap and also a white underside. They have these bright yellow eyes with a very thick black eyeline, almost like a little kind of bandit's mask. Males do tend to have less brown streaking on the chest than females. As you can see in the picture of the immature birds, they have this almost like necklace of brown streaks, and that tends to be a lot more faint on the males. So for immature birds, overall, they tend to be very similar to the adults, but they have pale edges to the wing feathers. It almost looks like they're gilded, like a very, very bright gold. And they have a orangey wash to the underside. Oh, do we have a question? Oh, I'll keep on going. All right, and instead of the yellow eye, they have an orange eye. So in flight, osprey have a very distinct shape, very long, lanky wings, similar to what you would see with a gull, which does make sense as they're both adapted to fairly similar environments. When they are in a soar or a glide, they hold their wings in a bowed position that gives them a very distinct M shape. So if you see a flying M, then your options should definitely include an osprey, especially if you're near a body of water. They tend to have very slow, stiff wing beats, and they're another species that we will see hovering over bodies of water. Okay, so do we have any questions from that section?
I'd say before you test us, there is a photo in the chat of a partial leucistic or light morph that Sheila shared. to
Oh,
test you.
fantastic. Oh, okay. All right, once I stop sharing my screen, I will definitely take a look at that. All right, so putting it all together. So in this section, I'm just going to touch a little bit on why do we want to ID raptors at all? And also just have like a fun little photo quiz. No pressure, just kind of going over a lot of the tools that we've learned, a lot of the species that we've covered, and seeing what we think. So why is it important to identify raptors? So one of the aspects of the work that I do over at VINS is we monitor migration and breeding activity for vulnerable species, including the American kestrel, like the one pictured here. We have a system of nest boxes throughout Vermont and New Hampshire. And by having folks monitor these boxes, we can get an idea of how our populations are doing. We can even go out and ban them. So again, by having folks who are able to ID kestrels and message us and be like, hey, like we have a kestrel here, we can have a better idea of when to go out and when kestrels might be coming back for their nesting season. Another really important tool for monitoring migration is hawk watches. So if you haven't been, I highly recommend visiting one. We have, I believe, 3 hawk watches in Vermont. There is the Mount Escutney Hawk Watch, the Putney Mountain Hawk Watch, and the hawk watch Mount Philo. So that's usually during fall migration, where volunteers will go and they will pretty much sit up there for multiple hours a day and count all of the raptors moving through. So by having the skills to know what you're looking at, we can really understand the movement patterns of all these different species. So another important reason is estimating populations. And again, for those vulnerable species, like I mentioned with American kestrels and also American goshawks. So by having a just general idea of how these species are doing, we can better inform policies on the state or even the national level. And of course, it's always good to just gain a better understanding of your local ecosystems. So by knowing what raptors are present, you can really gauge the health of an ecosystem. Okay, so who's ready for the photo quiz? All right, so first off, we have this bird. What do we notice? If anybody wants to write it in the chat or just unmute and say what they think.
I'll start it off. Adult bald eagle.
Yeah, so this is definitely an adult bald eagle. So what made you jump to bald eagle? What was the first thing you noticed?
White head.
Large white head.
Yep. White head, large white bill or large yellow bill. So yeah, those are all really good field marks for a bald eagle. Again, we don't really have a great reference for size, but all of those other aspects can really help us inform our decision that yes, this is an adult bald eagle. All right, what do we think about this one? What do we notice?
Ball head.
Yeah, we do have a very small head, very kind of flattened look here.
Open grasslands.
Yeah, open grasslands. Okay, so we have habitat. We have small, rounded face. We have open grasslands. What else do we notice?
That white band on its tail.
Yeah. So we have a white band right on the tail. Would you say it's more towards the tip of the tail or the base or on the rump?
Base.
Okay, yeah.
Could it be a broad-winged hawk?
Okay, so that's a good guess. What makes you think broadwing hawk?
The tail band and the fact that it's small.
Okay, yeah, those are both very good things to think about. What I'm noticing is that kind of again, that small rounded face. And also these wings appear, it can be hard to tell from this picture. The wings appear to be very long and a little more lanky. And also that tail, instead of having that kind of bright white and black of the broad wing, it has a bright white and then more of a brown. So I would rule out broad wing for this, but that is a very good guess.
Are the wings dihedral?
Yes, that is a dihedral. You can kind of see that tip of the closest wing that's pointed up. So that could tell us that this is a bird holding its wings in a dihedral. Any other thoughts? So this is a tough one. This is a female northern harrier. Yeah, again, the really good context clues for this are the open grassland, that owl-like face, the dihedral, and then that bright white rump patch. If you were to see this bird moving too, just the flight style of a harrier is so distinct, very rocking. They also tend to stay very low to the ground. So all of that together leads me to think this is a female northern harrier. All right, our next one, this is a tough one. So what do we notice?
Square tail.
Yeah, this picture
Square-ish.
does definitely make it look square-ish. Yeah, and that was a very good point. What else do we notice about the tail, at least compared to the body?
Well, the bands.
Yeah, it is a banded tail.
Look at my notes here.
Oh, good. It is also a very long tail. It's hard to tell because it is kind of scrunched up, but this is a very long tail in comparison to the body.
Looks like a large bird.
Yeah, so compared to this roof here, it can be hard to tell, but it could definitely be a larger bird. What do we notice about the head, or at least kind of that coloration? But is there any difference between kind of the color around the neck or the nape and the color right at the crown of the head?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another really, really good field mark, is that kind of light nape and that very, very dark cap.
It's more of a cap than a hood.
Yep. So if we were to narrow this down to buteo, accipiter, falcon, eagle, vulture, harrier, osprey, which group do we think it would fall into?
Buteo.
Buteo, okay. And what makes you think buteo?
Its size.
Yeah. So again, size can be difficult to judge from this. It is, especially when a bird puffs up like this, it can appear very larger or much larger. This bird is comparable in size to a broadwing, so it is in the realm of buteo size.
There's a guess in the chat. Is it a Cooper's hawk?
Yes, that's a great guess. Yeah, so this is a Cooper's hawk. So this is in our accipiter aster group. It's hard to see from this picture, and I include this specifically because one of the differences that we had mentioned between Cooper's hawk and sharp-shinned hawk is that squared off versus rounded tail. But that can be really difficult to see, even though Cooper's hawks do tend to have more of a round tail. Here, this Cooper's hawk, it almost looks squared off. But really, the key things to look for in this picture are that very dark cap with the light nape, and then that long striped tail. That is all really good indicators that we're looking at a Cooper's hawk. All right, last but not least, what do we think of this one?
Osprey.
Yeah, so this is an osprey. So what made you think osprey?
The white breast and the eye band.
Yeah, exactly. So that are both.
I've seen a lot of ospreys. It's one of the few hawks I can recognize.
Yeah, they are a great one to know because there's really not much else that looks like them. So once you get a really great image of an osprey, they can be a really great bird to compare to other birds. And yeah, that bright white chest and belly, that eye band are just really great field marks from osprey. And another really nice thing is you can read those from quite a distance too. Okay, so we're on to our last section. Were there any last questions from that previous section or any thoughts?
I did have one question.
Yeah, absolutely.
You described the red-shouldered hawk, and I've only seen those in Florida. I wasn't aware that they were around.
Yeah, they are definitely more common down south. Here in Vermont, we typically only see them around rivers, kind of wetland areas, although they can kind of make their way up north to more boggy areas. But yeah, we do, especially in spring, summer, early fall, we will have red-shouldered hawks in Vermont.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. So last but not least, I have some of my favorite recommended resources. So for field guides, there are really endless options you can choose from. One that I love and has been very reliable is Hawks in Flight by Pete Dunn, David Sibley, and Clay Sutton. I actually used that when I was training to be a hawk watcher this past fall. And it includes beautiful drawings and also some great, just so many different angles, lighting, all kinds of different views of native hawk species, not even just the Northeast, but across the United States. Another really great resource is the Crossley ID guide. That is a really fun guide, but also it's almost like a game. Each page has a different quiz, and again, kind of similar to Hawks in Flight, it has images in all different lighting positions. Just it's a really great way to kind of quiz yourself and get to know what just how one species can look very different in all these different conditions. As far as apps go, a really great resource is the Raptor ID app that's run by Hawkwatch International. It has a little section that has different species profiles, and within that, it has videos of each hawk species in flight. So if you had some trouble kind of visualizing what I was saying when I said this hawk has snappy wing beats or this hawk has buoyant flight, the Raptor ID app has really great videos that go more in depth into that specifically. Another really great app that I use pretty much every day is the Merlin ID app. It's a very user-friendly tool where you can either upload photos, you can record sound, or you can go through a little checklist of the different aspects of a bird you saw, and it will give you a list of potential options. You can also type in your area, and it will give you a list of potential species for your area. So definitely a great tool to have on hand. iNaturalist is another really great app that kind of pulls together a lot of community science data, and is another great one where you can upload a picture, upload a recording, and there are tons of experts on there who can give you an idea of what you're looking at. And then last but not least, and honestly the most fun, are hawk watches. Like I mentioned earlier, there are 3 in Vermont, but if you go across the country, there are some pretty incredible hawk watches. I served as the hawk counter at the Bake Oven Knob Hawk Watch in Pennsylvania. There's Hawk Mountain, also in Pennsylvania. The Cape May Bird Observatory in New Jersey is a pretty famous one. But if you want to really test your raptor ID skills and learn from the best, I cannot recommend enough going to a hawk watch. Also, it's just full of super fun, super kind folks. And yeah, I genuinely cannot recommend it enough. Yeah. Last of all, I just want to thank you all so much for being here. I love talking about raptors, and it's been lovely talking about them to you guys. If you have any final questions or comments, I would love to hear them. And in the meantime, just enjoy this picture of one of my favorite raptors, the turkey vulture.